Well, we'll fill the room.
Maybe, 5 or 6, 7 years ago. And they asked us, subsequent to that, we've always been
You have a nice lunch?
Yes, thank you. I had a little lunch. All right, that's much better. It's a nice live room, so I'll project loud enough so you can all hear.
So welcome to the second part of the Sound and Color Forum. We have a pretty interesting program today. We'll start with 2 presentations, Karl Maret, Gary Buchanan, and the second part will be kind of a demonstration with the sonar therapy technique. We will have a little break. And I think I will ask that you keep your question at the time that we do the practice. All our presenter is very dense into their information, so we'll pay attention. I'll let Gary to introduce Mr. Maret. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, following Karl and my presentations, we will have a demonstration. We'll set up a table, have the sound applicators, and show you the kinds of things we're doing. And at that time, we can take questions for Karl, myself, Yuki, anything that's been on your mind you'd like to know more about or understand better. Dr. Karl Maret is president of Dove Health Alliance in Aptos, a member of the Wisdom Council for the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine, or ISEM, and member of the Council of Biofield Scientists, among other institutions. And we're pleased to present our longtime colleague, Karl. He's been very supportive of our sonotherapy work. He designs all kinds of applications, which he's going to talk about today, technologies. He speaks regularly. He knows people around the world, scientists who are into alternative technologies. He's an expert on electromagnetic pollution and Wi-Fi pollution and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure he'll be talking about some of this, as well as the cosmos in general. When he flew in from Jupiter this morning, he had to change his name from Clark to Karl.
Thank you, Gary. It's really a joy to come back to Reno because there's an energy here that all of you who are in the Cosolargy community, of course, are aware. And the numerology of Reno is interesting. It's a 9, so it means a completion that brings all the different frequencies together. And here is a geothermal spring that has been around since the Indians were here first, I think. Mark Twain was here. So being here at Steamboat Springs is always a wonderful thing because our bodies are made out of water, and I'll be talking about that a little bit. And this is a place of renewal, physically and spiritually and emotionally. And we need this kind of renewal now in healthcare. My background, as you heard, is in electrical engineering, biomedical engineering, medicine. I did a postdoc in the University of California where we climbed Mount Everest in 1981 as part of the American Medical Research Expedition to Mount Everest. I built equipment we took to the summit of Mount Everest where we did the first physiological measurements on climbers at extreme altitude. And back then I had a vision back in 1981 that there would be a big shift coming 30 to 40 years hence. Not unlike the shifts that you've all heard about, that we heard about this morning. So there is a time of something ending and a time of something being reborn. I always like to joke that, I was a minister in a past lifetime, so in this lifetime I'm already preordained. But I'm really in the path of healing and I like energy medicine, which I want to talk to you about today. Energy medicine is really using the science of very low intensity energies, which we can call subtle energies, as well as electromagnetic, using the energies of our body to do healing, because we are all healers innately. We all work with our biofield, our bioelectrical field in our body. And I believe that we need a whole new approach to healthcare. And to me, it's analogous to this image of the monarchs. These were we growing in our garden in California just a few years ago. And remember that just before the butterfly emerges from the chrysalis, first it is, a wonderful caterpillar. And we had these caterpillars growing on the milkweeds, and then they emerged, as you can see here. And that time between it still being in the chrysalis and suddenly emerging is often very fast. It was very hard to catch them when they come right out. So I believe today's medicine needs to be rejuvenated, to use more energy medicine technologies, because right now our healthcare budget is such that we spend over 18% of our gross domestic product on healthcare. Over $3 trillion. I'll show you some slides about that. That's almost $10,000 for every man, woman, and child in America being spent on health care. And we need something that's more cost affordable and brings long-term healing. So before we talk about it, let's see where we are in America, because everybody always says America is the best in the world in healthcare. Well, I beg to differ. If you look at some of the statistics, we're tied with Cuba. Cuba spends this amount of money per capita. A couple of $100 we spend right now in the current thing about $10,000. So, it's huge. It's much higher. It's growing all the time. As you can see here, exponentially. We're at $10,000 now in 2017 per capita. And this is what everybody else in the world spends per capita on healthcare, you see. And it's so much different in America. So we just throw money at everything, and most of that goes to drugs, high-tech technologies, and we're not getting a big bang for the buck if we're 27th in the world in healthcare. So 1 year of healthcare in America costs more than the longest war we fought in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. We spend that every year, what those two wars have cost, just annually. The biggest changes in healthcare already happened when we started inventing and discovering electricity, because it led to medical diagnosis. This was at the end of the 19th century. Once we started having better hygiene with water and toilets and indoor plumbing, once we started to understand nutrition. And, in the early days of the 20th century, we had a lot of infectious diseases, so certainly antibiotics helped a lot. But now they're way overused. And when you look at what we spend money on in America, everybody says, oh, it's heart disease and cancer. No, what overshadows it all is pain. Pain is $635 billion a year, according to Johns Hopkins Journal of Pain. And that's higher than heart disease at $309 billion, rather, 243 for cancer per year, diabetes, almost $200 billion. And what is medicine doing about it? Well, medicine is giving you painkillers, and these painkillers are getting the majority of a large amount of Americans, especially middle-aged Americans, hooked. Long-term pain, 9.4 million Americans now take opioids for long-term pain. 2.1 million are addicted out of 21 million Americans that are addicted to substances of all kinds, of which only 10% get healthcare help. So that is said, the estimates vary, but in one thing I've read, it's 412 Americans die every day from prescription opioid overdoses. That's more than are killed by homicides per day and motor vehicle accidents. Opioid addiction given to you by your doctor. So look at that. This is a curve that's just recently come out. The US labor force It's dropped from its peak participation of 67%, now it's 63% in 2017. And why are these people not working? That could, because nearly half of all working age men who are not working or looking for a job take pain medication on a daily basis. So you have an addicted culture that is spending tons of money, and these people need a better way to have health care. Also, we're aging. The baby boomers are now rising. For the first time, the over 65-year-old population will be exceeding the under 5-year-olds, which are usually larger. With older people comes more morbidity, comes more health issues, comes more cost. So that's going to lead to rationing. And what are the US priorities about that? Well, in the 2015 survey, terrorism is our number one focus. Healthcare is number 7, Medicare is number 8, and scientific research is number 21. So you can see we need to change some of our US priorities. Helen Keller often said that a bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn. And living near Big Sur in California, you really want to pay attention to the turns. So medicine has been using many devices that are energy devices, Holter monitors for monitoring your heart rate, defibrillators in case your heart has atrial fibrillation or has other conduction issues, with a cardioverter developed in the 1950s, and so on. And so this is what medicine says, well, look, we're doing so many things for you, and they are, including magnetic resonance imaging devices and so on, developed in the 1970s. But these are all based on paradigms of classical physics, or Newtonian physics, which is basically mechanistic, reductionistic, and deterministic. So that deterministic means one cause causes one result. Reductionistic means we got to find the lowest common denominator, and then we can blame it on that. That's what led to one drug leads to one cure for one disease type of approach. And it doesn't always work like that. People like Harold Saxon Burr from Yale University already in the 1930s started looking at the energy field around the body. He used very sensitive voltage tube, vacuum tube voltmeters to do that. He found that the body has an electrical field around it that he could measure. It's described in a book called The Electric Patterns of Life, or The Blueprint for Immortality was the name of his book. You might still be able to find that. Other people, like the discoverer of vitamin C, Albert Szent-Györgyi, a Hungarian immigrant to the States, received a Nobel Prize for his work with vitamin C. He said, I'm sure that we will never be able to understand the essence of life if we restrict ourselves to the molecular level, just molecules, simple molecules, which is the basis of all pharmacology and psychophysiology in terms of neurotransmitters and so on. But he said a surprising subtlety of biological reactions is stipulated by the mobility of electrons. In other words, subatomic particles, electrons, and can be explained only from the position of quantum mechanics. He already said that in '68, because he felt like, quantum mechanics and quantum physics was invented in the 1920s and 1930s. And, our understanding of the electron has led to your computers and your different devices and these projectors. They all use quantum physical properties. But we haven't yet applied that to medicine. And that's what I want to show you. People like Robert Becker, an orthopedic surgeon, developed systems to heal bone issues, stimulators I'll show you in a minute. And he also found there is, anytime you break a bone or you have an injury, there's an electrical current flows to try to repair that. A perineural or a direct current system that hadn't been discovered by science. And he actually regenerated salamander legs, salamanders who lost a leg, using these electrical currents. Cyril Smith, a colleague of mine now in his 80s at the University of Liverpool, he worked with quantum physicist Herbert Froelich He himself was at the University of Salford. He wrote a book, Electromagnetic Man, because he got very interested. Why did certain people get sick when they're exposed to too much electromagnetic radiation of different kinds? And that whole book, Electromagnetic Man, is about that. So I want to show you some unusual things just to stimulate your mind about what's possible and what unusual things science has discovered, although these are not widely known. These are 3 experiments on not just electromagnetic, but on subtle energies. The first is an intriguing quantum physics demonstration of information transfer into water that has a physiological effect. Hu and Wu were 2 quantum physicists, and they did an interesting experiment. It was published in 2006 in the first journal of a journal called Neuroquantology, meaning nervous system interaction with quantum principles. And he showed that magnetic pulses or lasers that are put through an anesthetic solution directed into water could inform the information of the anesthetic agent into the water so that you could get measurable effects. Here's an example of how it worked. You can either take an electrical coil, and here is a tube of anesthetic agent, and you apply it to the person, and by just pulsing it, you could anesthetize the person without ever giving him the chemical drug. Or they could take a laser, like here, and shine it through the anesthetic solution into the water and imprint the water, and when people drank the water, they would get anesthetized. But there was no anesthetic agent in the water, just the information that structured the water. And here is an example. It worked better with tap water because it had minerals in it. Control had no effect, and here's different chloroforms, isoflurane, morphine, ether. They all had varying different effects, and the effect lasted for an hour or so after they drank it. So just think about that. You can give information and water that has enough of an effect to anesthetize you. We have to explain these things, you see. Here's another interesting example. This is Elmer Green, who just passed earlier this year. He was a good friend. He was the father of psychophysiology research and biofeedback. He had set up a chamber that had copper walls in it, and he put electrometers that measure electrical charge in the room. And I'll show you the setup here. Oops, I guess it's one back. Let's see if I can go back here. It doesn't seem to want to let me go back. Here it is. Okay, so he had rooms. Here are the copper walls and copper ceilings. Cu is copper. People sat on insulated glass blocks, so they were electrically totally insulated in it. A person sat here who received energy, and another person sat on other glass blocks and sent energy. These were master healers. And as they sent this energy in, they would record the electrical potentials in the walls. And here is what we saw. They were body voltage potentials, tens to hundreds of volts that these people generated. So you'd sit in a room, if I was a healer, and these rooms had ways to detect the electrical energy. We could project the energy from one person to another and measure potential changes in the walls, up to 200 volts. Here's another interesting experiment. This is the work of Dr. Chang Kaziang in Russia. He had developed a system where he had a transmitting chamber here, a kind of a resonator, energy resonator, that's shown in this picture over here. And then in a receiving chamber, he had, for example, chicken eggs in there, and he put ducks, for example, into the transmission chamber, tuned the thing up, and when the eggs hatched, he had chickens with webbed feet like duck feet. Genetically changed. Or he took corn and imprinted it on wheat, and the resultant was a hybrid of wheat and corn, genetically engineered just through energy. Now, do we need genetic engineering? Well, it's very popular. Yes, of course, we can use that. I'm not saying it's the only way to skin the cat, as it were, or change the cat into a dog, whatever we do. So when we talk about energy medicines, I just want to give you those as titillating experiments that said if this was really being researched, we could do all kinds of things differently. Do you understand? Genetic engineering, energy healing through energy transmissions, and imprinting information into water. So we have two kinds of classifications. Veritable energy, which means we can measure them. These are things we can measure, like the vibration of Gary's transducers, or electromagnetic forces that we can measure with light sensors or magnetism sensors or lasers and so on. Those are what we call veritable energies because they're measurable and more traditionally understood in physics. The others are they call putative energies, meaning sounds like, but we can't quite explain them. These are energies like qi that the Chinese use, or prana, or various ki in Japan. And these can't be measured so easily, but they do have an effect. Just like I showed you, they had an effect. So when you ask what is subtle energy, it's a difficult question because it's affected by consciousness, it's affected by intention, it's affected by people's belief systems, it's affected by what's called scalar waves, that's a long topic, or the magnetic vector potential field, also called the A field, or what the Russians call torsion fields. So subtle energy is just in the beginning of being researched by humanity. But subtle energy medicine and energy medicine typically needs to be non-invasive, meaning it's not going to disturb your body equilibrium. It should not use ionizing radiation, but low-level electromagnetic radiation. It should do no harm, a fundamental principle in naturopathic medicine, and it might utilize quantum processes like quantum coherence and so forth. So if we can do this, we could save, I believe, a lot of money in our healthcare system. So then you would ask me, well, how would you approach a healing process within people? What do people do when they come to our clinic? What do we first want to look at? Well, I suggest you look at 4 levels of imbalance within a person. On the fundamental level, there's the structural part, the bones, the muscles, the connective tissue, the joints, the misalignments. This is the realm of the osteopaths, the chiropractors, the massage people. Then we have a biochemical, where most of medicine is based nowadays. That's based on tissue imbalances and toxicity in the tissues, and chemical toxins and heavy metals and so on that have to be detoxified. And then there's the energy side of things, how the electrical things work in the body, how electrical currents and muscle contraction impulses and brain impulses are transmitted, and how they affect the energy producing parts of the cell called the mitochondria, your little power plants in the cell that produce ATP. And lastly, it's informational, like what I just demonstrated, that you can transmit the subtle vibrations into water, into helping to detox. And this is the realm of homeopathy, and this is the realm of more subtle energy medicine, including what we can do with sound and light therapies. Now, nowadays we're immersed in a field of electromagnetic radiation. I didn't bring any meters today, but I normally measure everywhere I go, and I can tell you it's really increased. So the trouble is, when you try to do science, you can't find anybody anymore who's not exposed as a control. Everybody has some degree, so it's hard to quantify this. But this is a general idea from 2005 to 2012. We have really expanded this tremendously. This is the amount of background radiation in France. This comes from cordless phones, cell phones, smart meters near your home, the Wi-Fi you all use, or many of you use in home and offices, the cell tower radiations, and so forth. And this didn't just develop slowly. This developed very fast, that now we are already moving towards 5G. 1G was primarily analog modulated. 2G was the first digital phones, the GSM phones. They were narrow band and had low frequency information modulated at a rate that we couldn't get that much information transmitted, so they stepped up the modulation pattern, and that was called UMTS, that's 3G. And now we're in 4G that many of you have on your smartphones. That's called long-term evolution, or LTE. Interesting choice of names here, long-term evolution. What will this do to our evolution? And everybody wants to download a video in 1 minute. For that, you need very fast data transmission. And what's coming now is 5G. And you may not have heard about that, but right now in front of the California legislature, there is a bill that's almost passing that we haven't been able to stop. They're going to start putting small refrigerator-sized boxes on every utility pole in every neighborhood. You're going to be saturated with 5G signals so that you can get wireless signals right from your telephone pole, and you're going to be sleeping and eating and breathing in that. That's what's coming, because the industry is driving this, because the industry is interested in money. So we have about 10,000 to 20,000 times more radiation than we had in the 1980s. And that's the background. I've measured it, you know. You have to educate yourself about it a little bit. A good introduction book is called An Electronic Silent Spring by Katie Singer. You can download it from her website, electronicsilentspring.com. Silent spring was a term that Rachel Carson initially mentioned. That was the time when so much pesticide was there in the 60s and 70s that she really made the world aware of how much pesticide was influencing genetic development. This is what we're into now, except it's electronic. So if you live near a cell tower, some of the most highest things that people report when they live in this electromagnetic environment is fatigue, headaches, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, irritability, skin issues, palpitations of the heart, ringing in the ears. I can't tell you how many young people I see now who are very heavily addicted to the technology, that there's even a term coined in Germany, it's called digital dementia. In Korea, which is the most highly connected society in the world, they are doing MRIs now of brains of kids who are heavy users, and they have Alzheimer's-like brains at age 19 to 25. So this is a real problem for humanity, because it's light, but it's what Rudolf Steiner called, it's called decayed light. Decayed light. Electricity is not the pure light we're getting from the sun. That's spiritual light. And now, of course, then there's the wearable technologies, you know, from the Apple Watches, and I think you're contemplating these devices. Well, even Bluetooth, which is, you know, communicating to your computer, you know, at lower power, and virtual reality things and fabrics on it. All of this is what science is now pushing with great economic incentives. And, you know, you're going to be living in this. So that nowadays, in 2012, it says how wireless is changing the world, the wireless issue in Time magazine. Well, what are some of the challenges with this? The problem is that 3 to 5% of the population, there might be 1 or 2 of you here, might be electrically hypersensitive. That's like having an allergy, like peanut allergy or something. And you may not even know it because you can't sense it. You don't have sensors for it, okay? And those people, that's 1 million Californians. And I see them in my clinic, and we have blood tests by which we can determine whether you're electrically hypersensitive. But regular medicine has never heard of this. And whenever they have heard of it, the industry has come in and tried to squash any of it because they don't want to be held liable. Although I can tell you that none of the big insurance companies like Lloyd's of London and so on are now insuring any carrier for any damage caused by electromagnetic radiation. They just won't cover you. So these, you know, this is what's ultimately going to be decided in the insurance market, just like the insurance market right now is getting hammered by what they have to pay out, you know, for Houston and probably Florida. And we're going to see this change coming economically, because that's what seems to be what finally drives it home. The reason we are so sensitive to that is we have 5 million crystals of magnetite in our brain tissue, and 20 times as much in the covering of the brain called the dura, or the meninges, the covering of the brain. It's filled with these microwave sensing crystals, so they can directly be affected by that. This is what pigeons and doves and birds use to navigate and fly. You know, they have a magnetic sense because we live on a magnetic planet. We also have receptors in our membranes that are called calcium channels, voltage-gated calcium channels. Calcium channels allow calcium ions to get in. That's how your nervous system works. Every time, you know, you've got billions of little firings of nerve cells, and before they can fire, they have to get calcium in the cell, and then they have to pump it out. And we can trigger that, and we know that because if you give somebody a calcium channel blocker drug, like your cardiologist might give you to block your heart impulses, the electrically sensitive people are suddenly no longer electrically sensitive. But who wants to be on a calcium channel blocker drug forever? Because it's going to affect all kinds of tissues, including cardiac tissues and brain tissue. So if you want to get into this field, a great book came out in 2014, edited by Paul Roche, many different authors, called Bioelectromagnetic and Subtle Energy Medicine. I'd recommend that to you if you're getting involved in this. So I want to talk to you today about energy medicine from these 5 perspectives: electromagnetic, light and laser therapies, bioresonance therapies, energy medicine diagnosis devices we have, and sound and vibration medicine, which I'll leave mostly to Gary and Yuki and so on to talk about. But let's talk about pain. You heard pain was $635 billion expenditure in our $3+ trillion healthcare budget. And one of the ways to treat pain is using pulsed electromagnetic fields, PEMFs. They can be both low power and high power. There's also microcurrent stimulators. There's laser therapies and sound therapies. All of them can be used for pain in various degrees. Here is a device that's pretty easy to buy. It's called a SCENAR, stands for Self-Controlled Energetic Neuroadaptive Regulator, very long name. What it basically does is it has electrodes on one side, on the other side of this, that looks like this, that you can rub over the skin. You measure the electrical potential, and then it sends this kind of biofeedback pulse into it until the pain goes away. So it measures, it treats, it measures, it treats, and as you run it over the body, it makes some noises and beeps along. And this is a wonderful device developed in Russia that come in home units and professional units. So that's one way to treat pain. Here's another one from the UK, same thing, interclinic.com. You can look at a broad range of frequencies. It's used by athletes and so on. Here is another idea of that, another picture of that, 15 to 480 pulses per second, you know, using low frequency stimulations to let your body release its natural painkillers called endorphins. Here is a high power device, and again, I heard that this center, the spa here, is starting to treating athletes, your local athletes from Reno and maybe down from Sacramento and so on here. Well, this might be just the cat's meow for that. This is a very conductive ring that allows very high magnetic fields to be created, and it pulses it. It was originally called Papimi. You know, it puts out 1.5 Tesla pulses, so that's a very high magnetic field. And it literally changes the charge dynamics of the cells and leads to a rapid pain relief. A lower cost system, those things cost around $20,000. They're more professional. Lower priced ones come out of Russia and other places. They often use, you know, a much lower 200 Gauss field, but you treat them, but they cost a lot less money. There's a lot of research on the use of pulsed magnetic fields over 30 years, a lot of research done in Russia and the East European countries, you know, for environmental things, for physiological things like normalizing fatty acid levels, pain relief, helping digestion, repairing wounds. You know, it seemed to be useful for a lot of things, but each different modality has to be researched for the right frequencies and the right intensities. Now, here's another system developed in Germany by an American, but he had trouble, you know, allowing it to get through the FDA, so they're making them in Germany now. 80% effective in osteo and rheumatoid arthritis. Here is the device that a person, in this case, has their leg being treated. And they typically do it for an hour for several days. Studied over 50,000 people. The pulse has to be always varying. If you always put the same frequency and pulses in, then you don't get the effect in magnetics. It may be different in sound therapy, but that's what they found works the best. Here's a different device. You know, there's many of these in Europe, and that's something you could easily incorporate here. Other pain approaches and other treatment approaches use something called microcurrent. That's a very low energy current you can put through the body. Microamperes is a millionth of an ampere, so you don't even feel it, but you can modulate it with different frequencies, and there's whole textbooks on it. This system was developed by a chiropractor in Oregon called Carolyn McMakin. And you can see they can apply these treatments directly through gloves applied to the skin that conduct the electrical energy, the microcurrent, right into the tissues where the tissue is needed. So you can combine massage with electrical stimulation. Microcurrent, look under frequencyspecific.com. Here's another system that I use from Germany. It uses, it's called a Clinic Master. They have one for dental things. It uses different microprocessors. You put in chip cards that have all the programs programmed into them, and then it allows these frequencies to be directed through electrodes put on the skin. And they conduct it through the body, gets the lymphatics moving and so forth. The modern version of that now uses iPods, but here you can see the electrodes. And you can see the Germans, like so many other people, are also using light stimulators on the acupuncture points that also run the same frequency patterns through the light. Okay, stimulation of fractures. I already mentioned that briefly, that this was already developed a while back. And since we have a lot of people whose bones never really healed, they're called non-union fractures. We can stimulate them by devices that look like this, that the orthopedic surgeons screw right into the bone, or they apply it through applicators like this across bones or across joints and so forth. A big industry, already a medical industry that's being used. Okay, and now I gotta do this. So another form that's starting to be used electrically is called transcranial magnetic stimulation. Seems to be helping people with memory issues, seems to help people with depression. 20 minutes a day, help people study at Northwestern and improve their memory, not the ones that got no treatment or sham treatment. It's able to specifically go to certain brain regions. Helps with depression. And Jerry Tennant is another doctor in this field. He wrote a book called Healing is Voltage. Some of you may have seen that. Chronic pain is often caused by the body getting too acidic. Acidic means that there is low pH, which means there's too many hydrogen ions, not enough electrons balancing that. And incidentally, if you want to suck up more electrons, which help your body, walk more barefoot on the ground, because the ground is loaded with electrons that want to be sucked up into your body. It's the cheapest antioxidant you can get. Everybody should be walking barefoot for a while, and you can even put a wire in the ground, a stick in the ground, run a wire to your leg, and you can apply that wire to places where you have pain, and you'll be surprised the pain may go away just by getting electrons into your body. Now, cancer is an interesting area, being number 2 cause of death in America. And once you hear about the words, the big C, then, a lot of people get worried because it's often associated with long-term morbidity or death. Well, it's interesting. There was a whole book that came out by Dr. Mukherjee, an oncologist, called The Emperor of All Maladies, which was made into a PBS series, highly recommended, because it tells you how doctors started thinking about cancer over the last century. And essentially what we now know about cancer is really a disease of maladaptive aging. It's not really something that attacks you, it's something that goes wrong when your cells aren't communicating properly. And basically what he says, cancer is indeed the load built into our genome, our genetic code, the leaden counterweight to our aspirations for immortality. Cancer cells are immortal, they just keep going, they don't have any checks and balances. And what we're finding out now is that different cancers are all unique, and they all have unique genetic signatures, so that there are multiple genes involved. And the trick nowadays is trying to find how to turn those genes on and off, because your genes aren't your destiny. Your environment, how you turn your genes on and off, is your destiny. That's called epigenetics or epigenomics. So how does frequency medicine work with this? So this is genetic medicine, where they say, okay, for colorectal cancer, you got a lot of this gene and this gene, see the high peaks. And so then they try to find a pharmacological or an immunological way to give you a treatment to get that gene turned off. That's the medical approach. Well, this doctor, his name is Boris Pashy, is a friend of mine at Wake Forest University. He found out that all tumors had specific frequencies. Isn't that interesting? Specific frequencies for different types of tumor. And the more the tumor grows, the more frequencies get created. So how did he do that? First, he started out studying sleep, and he pioneered a treatment for insomnia, but he felt that wasn't really where he wanted to put his energy, because he was an oncologist. But, for those of you interested, I can give you the reference. But then he started looking at how can we use this for treating various cancers. And having found that electromagnetic stimulation might help, he started treating cancers this way. And the way they found this out is if you take a blood pressure reading, this is a blood pressure graph. When he started the treatment at a specific frequency, the pulse waveform went up. See how much bigger it is here versus there. And so that we could tell which frequencies worked and which frequencies didn't work by measuring the blood pressure signal. And then this was published in the Journal of Experimental and Clinical Cancer Research in 2009. And here's all the frequencies for different types of tumors, the number of people studied, the number of sessions they did, the number of frequencies they found. See, the highest frequency here is for ovarian cancer, interestingly enough. Brain tumors didn't have that many frequencies. Thyroid tumor or thymus gland tumors, thymoma, very few. But many had breast cancer, prostate cancer, the two most common frequencies in men and women. Had a lot of frequencies. And many of these frequencies were common to different tumors. So you could maybe say, can we use all these frequencies for all these tumors? That's what they're after. Anyway, it was published in the British Journal of Cancer. And they had 3 partial and 1 complete healing response. And the way they did it, that's just another paper, is they used this kind of device. This is a spoon-like device that you put on your tongue. And the person here has it in their mouth. There's the device. It modulates a 27 megahertz signal, which is a very slow by radio frequency standard signal. Megahertz is 1,000,000 cycles a second. And then they step through these frequencies, 310.2, 423.3, 427.1, and so forth. And they go through all these frequencies over and over again in a matter of an hour, and people just sit there with a spoon on their tongue. Here's an example. He holds it there on the right, and there he puts it under his tongue. These are being built in Germany now. They're running trials, and you can see at this low frequency of 27 megahertz, the whole body becomes a resonant antenna and all the cells get bathed in these frequencies. That's how they're treating it. So we've talked about getting these in, and they're at very low power levels. So you're basically doing, but you have to do it for the right amount of time. If you just do it for an hour, it won't do anything. If you do it for, in this case, 3 hours a day for 7 days, you get a pretty good response. For 6 hours a day for 7 days, get even better response. But if you only do it for 3 days, you don't get any response. So like any treatment, you need to do it long enough so the body can change itself. And this already comes out of the work of Ross 80, who said that the body has these frequency windows at a certain amplitude and at a certain frequency versus amplitude or intensity. There's a sweet spot where things unlock. So that's why certain frequencies, Dr. Manners found out, that work for sound therapy and not other frequencies. So it is really all music, and learning to decipher the language of music is the key. So, but notice that the modulation frequencies for cancer are all in the audio frequency band, from 100 cycles a second to 21,000 cycles a second, all audio, but being carried into the body by an electromagnetic wave. And here's some examples of other things. There's many of these magnetic mats. Some of you may have heard of Beamer and other devices. I use this magnetic field from Switzerland. There's devices you can buy now for under $300 you can put on your brain to wake up your brain. It's called Cortex. It used to be called Fisher-Wallace. This is a device that you can activate the electrons coming into your body by using a cell connected to a battery, so you can get electrons into your body, and then the body is ready to switch. And people hold these hands that pick up your electrocardiogram, and then we can send frequencies right into your body, carried on your own heartbeat, on your electrical signal. Now, I mentioned earlier the problems that we have with brain degeneration now. Neurodegeneration is what people are dying from now. Not so much cancer, not so much heart disease, those are still the big killers, but they slowly fade out through Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, you know. And this whole field now of study is very hot. It's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, remember this word. And remember this man, he happens to be at the university where I trained in Canada, at University of Toronto, Norman Deutsch. He wrote first the book, The Brain That Changes Itself, and then this book, which is even better because it shows all the applied things that science has come up with in this century, called The Brain's Way of Healing. I would recommend you all get that. This book was written in 2015, is already translated into 19 languages. This doesn't happen unless people are highly interested in what he's writing about. So that book will tell you about approaches for healing that are absolutely fantastic. It basically says your brain will rearrange itself so you can overcome the effects of aging if you really do that. And here's an example of a portable neuromodulation stimulator, also called Pond's device, developed by these three gentlemen at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And there are a Russian scientist on the right here and a biomedical engineer, electrical engineer. And this consists of the device shown on the left that you put under your tongue. Now, why is your tongue so important? I just showed you one device of Dr. Pashi that you put an electrical signal in. Well, this has an array of 144 electrodes. It's hard to see here, but there are little gold-plated electrodes. You put it on your tongue. Your tongue has between 15,000 and 50,000 sensors for pain, for pressure, for taste. You know, your tongue is only 2 inches away from the back of your brainstem. So what they found is when people put this tongue, 144 electrodes running at 200 cycles a second, it activated the whole brain. and people overcame their neurodegeneration. Now, think about it for a minute. Why would you or you have any kind of neurodegeneration? Why is your brain, this is not the best time of the day to teach at 2 o'clock, because everybody has the postprandial dip. After they eat, they want to fall asleep and have a siesta. So I'll try to keep you entertained. But let's say you're waking up in the morning and your brain isn't working so well. Or you have one of these neurodegenerations, or you're starting to suffer from Alzheimer's or whatever, right? What's happening is the brain part, the neurons that aren't working well, are sending a lot of noise into the brain. Whereas the parts of you that are thinking sends a lot of good, coherent information there. So the net result of people with brain degeneration, and electromagnetic radiation, by the way, causes a lot of brain problems. So does eating gluten for people who are sensitive to wheat. Neurodegeneration is starting to become rampant, even in the kids. They can't remember, they can't learn, see? And what's happening is the signal-to-noise ratio gets worse. Not enough signal. So what we're doing with these stimulators, we're increasing the amount of signal so the brain wakes up, and then it repairs itself using neuroplasticity. That's how this works. Anyway, you can read about it in Dr. Deutsch's book, The Brain's Way of Healing. Scientists recently found out that the human brain is organized with so many substructures that if you had to mathematically model it, it's an 11-dimensional structure. Space-time is 4 dimensions. You've got at least 7 more dimensions of complexity in your brain. You have a supercomputer that is basically not working so well for a lot of Americans. And we need to change that. That's why I'm developing devices for that. So one of the devices to do then is light therapies. Here's an example of picking up radiation from a black garbage bag with an infrared camera. You can see everything perfectly. It's just looking at infrared on a scale here. This is a temperature scale, so you can actually make that out. So infrared is one of the communication frequencies the body uses. If you want to see if somebody is healing, if they sprain an ankle, it usually shows up in an infrared camera as white or red. That's hotter, a hot, inflamed, sprained ankle. Somebody does therapeutic touch on it, and here you can see in a matter of about 25 minutes, all the inflammation reduces. How is this being done? By somebody doing healing work on the person, but this scientifically demonstrates that it works. So infrared camera could be something you could have to show people. People like to see what you do works, besides them not having so much pain. Of course, we've used blue light in premature babies because they can't break down the bilirubin from the bile, and that becomes toxic to their brain. So they lie under blue light because that's been found to help that. Lasers have been used for a long time. We use lasers in our clinic. There's an Erconia laser there. There's other lasers. These help with increased cell metabolism, stimulate cell growth, repair tissue, help with wound healing, help with nerve function. So we use lasers modulated at specific frequencies for many things. When you think about it, every cell has about 100,000 chemical reactions happening every second. And cells die 1 million at a time every second, or are instantly replaced in your body all over. You're constantly having cells die and replaced. If you don't replace them at the right rate, then it becomes a tumor, a swelling, a cancer. So this is not all regulated through chemistry. It's too slow. It's regulated through light, which are called biophotons, because they can regulate up to 1 billion processes a cell. So your body works on light. And as you'll see in a minute, light regenerates all the water, and your body is mostly water. 99% of all the molecules are in your body are one kind of molecule. And you guessed it, it's water. 99% of all the molecules. I'm not saying 99% by body weight or whatever. That's about 60 to 70% water, because there's a lot of other elements in there, but in terms of the number of molecules, water is a walking, talking, coherent body bag of water that is doing all this magic, and that is influenced by the sunlight. So all this magic happens in the mitochondria. So these kind of shaped things that produce energy in the form of ATP, and they all work at different resonances, so we use light for that. Okay, so it accelerates wound healing. I won't go through the whole mechanism, but we can use laser light and rapidly heal tissue. In this system here, developed in Germany, we actually stick different color lasers into your veins, and it creates different effects based on the color of the laser, which is called its wavelength, as well as how it is modulated. So you can stick it right into a vein and you can regenerate things in the body, just like you could infuse drugs into it. You can also put them in acupuncture meridians, as shown here, so you stimulate the meridians with laser light. Works as good as putting a needle in some cases better. In America, they've developed this system that again is an intravenous ultraviolet light system called by Intellimedics, Intellimedical. It uses infrared light, it uses red colored light that's 630 nanometers and green light. The ultraviolet light gets rid of pathogens. We all carry a lot of pathogens in our blood and so on. The red is anti-inflammatory, activates ATP energy production, helps with tissue regeneration, and the green makes the cells more elastic and improves healing. So they are applied in phases over 30 minutes, twice. Other devices we use for light therapy is this laser device from Germany that you could also use here at the clinic that you can modulate with any sound. 64 small lasers, 64 red LEDs, and you can deliver all your light off the shelf right into your body. Or you can have these multicolor light displays. They're like panels of light that produce various colored lights. Another thing we use in our clinic is TheraGem therapy. This is white light sent through gem cups. Different gems have different colors, and when you send the light through the gem, you bring in the vibration of the gem along with the light directly into the body, and they all run in different frequencies as well. That's called TheraGem. Medicahealth.org is the company. This is a light treatment system that's used commercially already in medicine called anodyne for people with diabetic neuropathy who have tingling in their legs, okay? And here is another system using some of the Paul Noget frequencies, again applied through light, called a chi light, or light energy. Alternatively, we can use light to treat cancer. The way this usually works is you have to give an agent that you inject intravenously that is activated by the person lying in these light boxes. A lot of light coming into their body to sensitize this chemical which bonds to the cancer cell and selectively nukes it out. Light to treat cancer. Fritz Popp was one of the founders of Biophotons and his partner Roland van Wyk. And they found out when they start becoming cancer, start leaking light. And when you can detect the amount of light leaking from a body, when the light is no longer held coherent, and cancer cells, definitely give off a lot more light versus non-cancer or normal liver cells. So this is an example to show that we work based on light. Okay. I love light, not just from the sunlight, not just what we know spiritually about light, but because our body runs on light, and that light actually works through the water in our bodies. So if you can just get the next generation educated that our body is made out of water, that I'll show you about in a minute, and that it runs on light. So here's a device I just built because I wanted to develop a prototype brain stimulator that you could put on your brain or any part of your body. It uses 3 different frequencies of light in terms of color. There's a green, a red, and an infrared or heat. And they're all being modulated by sound. And then in the back, I have a little player that you can record all the different sonations or sounds or things. So you can kind of make that visible. For example, this is a photocell connected to a loudspeaker. And, you know, if I hold it into the beam of this thing, you can hear where the light beam is transmitting digital information. You know, it's not here, but when you hit it, you know, so you need something to translate the modulated light. So that, you know, and that's what your TV remote works on. And, you know, this is probably a remote control. If I pointed this to here, you know, you could hear it. Different ones have different frequency patterns. That's how you control your TV, using infrared light. So I wanted to use that for healing. So if I put this on here and turn it on, a second, is it on now? Make sure it's playing. You know, so it's sounds you may have already experienced through your body directly, or you are hearing the sound of a voice modulated on the light and being received by the photocell for reproduction. So if I interrupt the photocell, you won't hear something, right? And it's in stereo, so you have things, or you can use 2 together, so you can actually hear it. So different. And as you know, they all do things. So I wanted to transmit what you can normally transmit through sound to the body through sound transducers, which we're going to see in a minute. I wanted to compare that to what we can do by modulating light with the same sound or whatever frequency. So I have other devices that can put specific frequencies into this device, so we can actually test it out. So these are ways to make sound carried on light visible. And that's what you need to be able to see it. Okay, did everybody understand that basically? So I'm transmitting an invisible but very small micro amplitude modulation on the light, not pulse wave, not other things, but actually the same way as your AM radio station uses, you know, 1000 on the dial and modulates it with music and sound. I'm doing the same thing with healing frequencies put through light. And we could have people lying on a table and having all the same frequencies going. And that's the way I use cymotherapy in my clinic, based on what I've learned from Gary. I use the same transducers and what Adam Reed has built and so on. But I put them together with a field of light at the same time on the table. Yeah.
You could take the recorded frequencies that you're dealing with and generate a specific path in a spigot in each of the tub rooms, and all the water coming through from the wonderful reserve would be imprinted with the frequencies and the energetics of that light.
Yeah, you could do that with water, you could do that with magnetics, there's many ways to skin the cat, but that's the way to do it, to create high energy water. When you lie in there, not only the geothermal energy and the minerals in the water, but also the subtle energies, right? That's the future, yeah. So the old model that I learned in medical school of bioresonances was there was a receptor, you know, on the cell membrane, and a key, like a molecule, a vitamin or a drug, fit into that. That's outdated now. It all works more like resonance, like 2 tuning forks coming into vibration. And so what happens is these receptors that are on the cell membrane, here's the cell membrane, they can be stimulated, of course, through chemicals, but you can also directly stimulate them by some kind of signal, electromagnetic or light or sound, okay? And that's much faster. So here's all the little proteins, and this is what Jim Oshman and other people have called, the intelligence of the cell. Bruce Lipton is a good friend of mine, and that's what he, as a molecular biologist, I did at Stanford. He said, look, this is where the intelligence is. It isn't in the DNA, it's in the cell membrane receptors. And then, of course, it goes from the cell membrane receptors through a whole cascade of chemicals, all vibrating at different rates, that then activates the cell nucleus where the DNA is located. So, this is what we call epigenetic modulation. And this is the new hot field in integrative medicine. So now we're trying to bring East and West together. This is called Energy Medicine, East and West, a book about the history of Qi. We're trying to figure out what the ancients talked in mystical language into scientific terminology in Western science. Acupuncture meridians, aren't just one little point. They're complex patterns of conductivity in the skin, and you have tons of acupuncture meridians, and you can detect them with point detectors that measure the resistance of the skin. People like Reinhold Woll in Germany, a dentist, started doing measurements on these points on the fingers, on the toes, and figured out that they should have a certain energy in them that you could measure electrically. He used primarily direct current at the time, and that whole thing was called a biofeedback system, and it was called EAV, or electroacupuncture, according to Woll. He had a student, Helmut Schimmel, a German scientist, developed a further system, experimented with it further, again a point-based system, and then when you put various different remedies into a circuit like that, if there was a resonance with that remedy, you could determine what the right homeopathic or vitamin or herb would be for a person. And there might be people in this town who use similar things. This is well used in Europe, called Vega testing. The Russians used this on the Mir space station because they didn't have a doctor nearby. What you had to do is measure your meridians to see if you were in good shape, and if your meridians were out of balance, which is a precursor, you're getting an illness like a cold, then they could do balancing therapy right there on the space station. These things now have become various different computerized systems. They have different names, Asira, Biomeridian, Bioscan, and there's often a lot of claims made because everybody's copying from somebody else, but a lot more research needs to be done. A German device here called a BICOM, which has been licensed here for animal use, but people use it for human. You lie on here, you might hold electrodes, you can put things into the honeycomb to test material. And in this device, in this box, there is something that takes your slow or pathological vibrations and inverts them. The normal body can adapt very fast, but the slow vibrations, they're kind of more like stuck. It's like being slow moving. And those slow moving vibrations you can invert, and then they create a cancellation in the body, and the person gets better. So that's using that. The Russians have developed a similar system called Data Ellis. Sold in Europe primarily, done a lot of clinical studies. They have all pre-programmed programs for organ balancing, healing the body. These are low cost. They use sound. They use light therapy in biofeedback. But you can see the basic idea based on similar German designs. You can, and any of you who want to have me send you a PDF of this presentation so you can look at the slides some more just for your own use, just give me your name later or your email address. I'll email it to you, okay? Since I'm going through this pretty fast. Hepatitis C, you can get a drug for almost $100,000 called Harvoni, which is being used now to treat hepatitis C. The Data Ellis system feels like it can do the same thing for a couple of $100. So different approach, All right, one other system is the Lenio system out of Hungary. This is a good reference book for any of you, called The Scientific Basis of Integrative Medicine by my colleague, Dr. Wisniewski. If you want to, there's a whole chapter by Bernie Williams in there on frequency therapies and various different things in a textbook-like setting. Now, energy medicine diagnostic approaches. Okay, this is where we really have various different devices. Some of these use what's called non-linear diagnostics. I use this system called the e-test scan. It's very, very interesting. It uses anatomical pictures, and it, oops, I keep doing that. You put on a set of headphones that have magnetic sensors in it. You could use a laser as well pointed at the person to amplify it. And then you put these pictures of different parts of the anatomy up here, some examples like a cross-section of the body, cross-section of the head, arms, the whole body. And they should normally have these kind of symbols on them. This is normal, this is close to normal. This is a weakness in regulation of how your body energy works. This is a problem of adaptation, and this is an energy block. And you can actually determine them, and they may be just emotional energies, they could be chemical energies, it could be toxicity, could be structural problems. It just tells you how well the body is regulating, and I can scan the body over in 10 minutes and kind of look at where the majority of problems are. Yeah?
You've done mine.
Yes, that's right, I've done. Gene remembers, you know. Okay. This is another device that's actually been approved by the FDA, but only because it had heart rate variability in it. You put your hands and feet on plates and you measure the current through your body using 22 different pathways. You have electrodes on the forehead, hands and feet, and it measures how your tissue works. Heart rate variability, you should have that over here. It's a very cheap system. Relatively inexpensive. You can allow to check out your autonomic nervous system, your sympathetic, your fight or flight, or your parasympathetic, your relaxation and digestion response. Okay, and now I want to just talk a little bit about sound therapy in the context also of water, because Novalis already said every sickness is a musical problem and every cure is a musical solution. Now, I always loved that. He was a German poet and philosopher. So this is an actual picture at almost 1 million times magnification of atoms using a special micrograph of an electrical charge on a very tight platinum tipped needle. And you can see the standing waves as resonant wave patterns in matter. So everything is vibrating, except it's so fast and so small that you can't see it. Of course, when we get waves that move together, they create interference pattern. You get one wave moving past another wave. It creates these interference patterns, and you can make them visible. Show you another device if you like later, where I actually show you how those waves look on an oscilloscope that's built into a little frequency generator I built. Like Gary, I was interested in water. These are some of the resonant water patterns I photographed in my own system that I built just to see what the effect of frequencies are and to see what the variables are in all of that. And they're beautiful patterns is what they actually look like, and you've seen those from what Gary has done. And when we change just the frequencies the slightest little bit, the whole system rebalances itself and comes back into chaos and then back into order. And that's essentially how your body works. So it's all about water and bioresonances. Our body, as you know, is between 64 and 75% water, much more if you're a baby. We get dehydrated as we get older. All proteins in your body are hydrated. These are all little water molecules here. That's what makes the protein rotate itself. The electrical charge around it carried by the water. Okay, and these hydrogen bonding bridges form at terahertz rate, faster than your computer. Your computer works at gigahertz, which is billion times a second. This is at quadrillion times a second, a picohertz, or terahertz rate. So the water isn't just a solvent for things, it's the actual matrix in which all biology arises. And somebody has said that this century will be the century not of physics, but of biology. And one key person in this is Gerald Pollack, that we're going to hear a lot more in a minute from Gary about, but he wrote this wonderful book called The Fourth State of Water, which basically says is that there is a semi-crystalline, electrically charged phase around water that creates what he calls an exclusion zone. So there's negative charges and positive charges, and you create this energy zone near membranes or near proteins. That's what you can see. This charge causes little water droplets to float around the water. This is when you put an electrical charge in two beakers. With a high voltage, you can pull the water apart and the water bridge doesn't break. That's all based on electrical ways. And the way you regenerate this exclusion zone is through sunlight. So we are basically, you can charge up water with sunlight, you can charge up plants with photosynthesis. It works on the same principle. And this is what drives the electrical processes inside the cell. And this is one of the great works that I'm sure we'll hear about more in a second. So how do you increase the electrical charge in your body? Drink more water if you're dehydrated. Green juices are very rich in exclusion zone water. Coconut water, turmeric, certain things, which are also anti-inflammatories, build easy water. Sunshine builds it. Being in a sauna with infrared builds it. Or walking on the ground where there's a lot of electrons, grounding builds it. So all the things I suggested earlier. Because water is influenced by not only chemicals and molecules and by the hydrogen ion charges, which is called the pH, or the oxidation reduction potential, which is the charge of the electrons, but it's also affected by sound, by light, by vibration, by magnetics, and also how it flows through different forms, through different geometries, and so on. So it works on all of that. And people like Luc Montagnier, who helped to discover the AIDS virus and so on, he's now working in China, getting DNA information imprinted into water. So he's one of the forward-looking scientists actually working with DNA and water. I've built this machine in our clinic that you're welcome to see sometime. It has a vortex funnel in it, and it's lit up with light of any color that you can adjust. The water flows through this vortex over here, and it has 3 lasers going into the water right where the vortex meets down here. It's most intense. And people record their intention into the water. They speak their words, how they want to heal. And then the light, modulated by their intention, goes into the water, and they can drink their intention. And now, because this is too complicated to build, I figured out in the long term was a great demonstration project. He uses, a icosahedral plastic light structure around it, and it's all lit up, but it makes beautiful color photographs. Now we have them in little boxes that you record your intention into, and you put it through a crystal, and the crystal transmits it into your healing space, or you can put your water near the crystal. But water can be structured also in the body through ultrasound. That's used in regular medicine, from breaking apart kidney stones to healing joint stiffness and other things like that. So that's high frequency sound. You can apply it through sound chairs that we've talked about before, where transducers are right in the chair and you can put it in any position. And you can use it to change neural entrainment or even increase creativity, again using sound. And some of you, if you're interested, my writings about it, Eileen McCusick, who uses healing with tuning forks and so on, I wrote the foreword to her book, Tuning the Human Biofield. Or there's a chapter on sound technologies, and I wrote the foreword to this book called Energy Medicine Technologies that came out edited by Finley Eversole. So that's my introduction to sound. I'm not going to say that much about it right now, except to say that I feel a spiritual and energetic connection with this place, and I love the way you've lit up the colors here in the hallway of Steamboat Springs. But here's a vision that you might want to think about for what an energy center, healing center of tomorrow might look like. And I've arranged it here. This is from our nonprofit foundation, the Dove Health Alliance. So there may be energetic balancing therapies, you know, laying on of hands to therapeutic touch to any other things that just use some form of energy, either given by a human being or given by devices, but mostly by human. There could be spaces. Spaces have resonance. As Winston Churchill said, first we build our buildings, or first we shape our buildings and then they shape us. So this room with a slightly sloped ceiling and these arches here, all of this has a vibratory influence. If you sit inside a pyramid, you have a different influence. If you sit inside a icosahedral structure like I've built in our house, has a whole different energy in it. So when you're thinking about new geometries, new architecture, new healing spaces, it's important to understand sacred geometry and all that entails. This creates a resonant space, and just being in that space, like in cathedrals where the water flows underneath it, like Winchester Cathedral or Salisbury Cathedral in England, that's why they built their cathedrals there, because they had water flowing underneath that set up a ley line and an energy current. They called it the snake that flowed in the ground, right? So very important to douse the place where you build it. Breath and air therapies, from pranayama, from ancient Ayurveda, to any inhalation therapies, air-ion therapies, they could all be part of that. Of course, water therapies, I've already alluded to, so I won't say more than that, but there's a lot more about flowing water in a vortex and regenerating the energy and restructuring the clusters and putting memory into the water. Then there's, of course, exercise and what I call life force activation therapy. The reason you exercise is to move the lymph, not to lose weight. The reason you exercise is to engage the will, not to just let yourself go literally to become flaccid and weak. You know, the old adage, use it or lose it. And the older I get, now I'm in my 70th year, I realize it's important to keep doing all these things because it doesn't get any easier. Twice the effort for half the gain is the new mantra, you know, so that's what you have to do. Nutrition and herbal therapies grouped together here. Of course, we do a lot of that already in our modern alternative naturopathic medicine. Then there's homeopathic and pharmacological therapies, should you need pharmacological. They all have their place. Psychotherapy and art therapy should be together with that. Art therapy is tremendously healing for psychological issues. And plant medicine, by the way, it could be in the herbal therapies. There's like places like in Costa Rica called Rhythmia where you can do plant medicine. The government of Costa Rica have allowed people there to take ayahuasca under controlled settings, and that's going to be very healing for psychotherapy in the future. So that kind of bridges this area. Sound and acoustic therapies that you're learning more about. Structural therapies, which is your osteopathic and your chiropractic and anything structural. Then there's a whole area of inert gas therapies. You can take inert gases and create plasma out of them. That creates magnetic fields and puts information through the plasma, like Rife devices we have in our clinic. So you can use those. And finally, light and color therapy. Just the pure colors can be healing, but also light the way I've demonstrated, where you modulate the light. So all of that. So this is if we have these kind of centers for healing and spa and rejuvenation, I think we can really change medicine. And thank you for your attention.